Welcome back to the People Analytics Podcast. My name is Lindsay Pettin, and I am your host for this show. Today, I have with me Bennett Andelman, who is the Chief People Officer at Houwzer. Welcome, Bennett. It's great to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much, Lindsay.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about what you do, your background, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, sure. So I am currently the Chief People Officer of Houwzer, as you just suggested, and I am responsible for making employees have joy at work. And that's really the simplistic nature of it. I want people having fun, being a little weird, meaning being their full selves, bringing their whole selves to work, regardless of where they come from, how they grew up, what their skill set is, who they love, who they pray to, what they look like. Like, I just want a diverse workplace that loves to work with one another. That is the ultimate goal. And obviously inside of that, to drive revenue for the organization through the excitement, energy, commitment, and passion of employees.
That's awesome. So how has your career led you to this point?
So it's been a bit of a crazy career path to get here. So I was actually a childhood actor, and I thought I was going to go into that field. Went to Carnegie Mellon University initially in order to pursue that craft. But I actually ended up falling in love with the craft of communications and ultimately the craft of marketing attached to communications. And so I ended up transferring out of Carnegie Mellon to do a dual major in theater as well as marketing and communications. And then when I graduated, after spending about a year trying to figure myself out in Los Angeles, and realized how interesting that market was, especially as a young screenwriter, actor, etc., that I wanted to lean back into the concepts of marketing and advertising and communications. So I came back to the East Coast, got a job at an advertising agency in New York City that worked on TiVo when TiVo was cool and new before DVR and Comcast and the world took all that stuff over. But really cut my teeth in advertising and thought I would be there forever. I really fell in love with it as a young copywriter, and then initially moved into account services. I really kind of fell in love with that role as it relates to strategy and buyer behavior and trying to get people to fall in love with brands and what that all meant, and storytelling being a big part of that. Lived in the advertising world for quite some time. Over the course of the first 10 years or so of my career, started my own agency after a stint in a couple additional agencies, where I cut my teeth officially in both New York and Philadelphia. Ended up in Philadelphia full time. And then ultimately, when I started my agency, partnered with another agency, and we worked on food, fragrance, and finance. Those were our core clients. Along came this little engine that could, by the name of Power Windows and Siding, a young regional brand at the time, about $15 million in annuals, who was obviously working on windows and siding. That was their primary core discipline. I did not want to work with them at first. Thought that they weren't a part of our 3F scenario, and that food, fragrance, and finance felt a lot more fun and cool than remodeling. Nonetheless, in the process of meeting the owners of that organization, becoming fast friends with them, I fell in love with the brand, love their mission. And the thing I love the most is that at the executive level, they were confident in themselves enough to debate each other in rooms, make decisions, and then all in on those decisions, unified when those decisions were made. And I felt there was a lot of energy in that concept, in that room, as far as leadership was concerned. And I really appreciated the vision for long-term growth in the organization. After 5 years of being an ad exec partner in a firm, I sold my shares and decided to start the marketing department at Power. At that time, Power Home Remodeling. We started rebranding the name at that point. And I was at Power for 11 years running their marketing communications department. And inside of that, had the great pleasure of creating or helping develop and then nurture the most amazing creative team I've ever had the opportunity to work with in my career. 30 incredible people under my umbrella, from account services and strategy to PR and social media to creative in design, copy, photo, film. And inside of the walls of Power, we focused most of our time and attention to developing a best-in-class culture. We obviously needed to maintain the brand and ensure that our customers knew who we were, what our USP was ultimately. But we spent the majority of our time ensuring that which was the focus of the company, that people wanted to work there. And I think it was an interesting model because the way it worked at Power is that the majority of our employees were canvassing, knocking on doors for a living. And while they would have the opportunity to make a handsome living, it's a very difficult job. Imagine being in Chicago in February and trying to knock on
I'm in
doors.
Michigan. Yeah.
Right? So not the best scenario in the
No.
world. So, and on top of that, I don't think anyone wakes up when they're 11 or 12 years old and says, man, wouldn't it be the best thing in the world? Wouldn't my utopia if I could just work for a remodeling company one day and sell windows? That would be awesome. So it was a tall order. And I took it on and I fell in love with it. How do you get really remarkable candidates that would otherwise want to work for Google, Facebook, Wall Street, be a teacher, be a lawyer, to want to work for a modeling company? And we spent a lot of our time and attention building the internal foundation to create an employee experience and engagement that was second to none in the business and then second to none in the world. And over the course of my 10 years there and building that foundation out from creating entertainment channels within an organization that was selling these products, but making it fun, creating competitions, making people famous, creating parody films and having fun doing that, like almost The Office within The Office. And then developing magazines and developing initiatives where, as I said earlier, creating a diverse culture that leans on each other and understands and appreciates that opinions come from everywhere, that you need to respect everyone's opinions and learn from everybody and listen first, and creating that type of culture for military veterans to come on into that business, for women in a male-dominated industry to come into that business and dominate that industry, and for people of all sorts of underprivileged or underappreciated backgrounds coming on in to that business and being incredibly successful as well. And then creating a melting pot of diverse leadership accordingly. And over the course of doing that for 11 years, we became the number one company to work for millennials by Fortune magazine, among many other awards and accolades that were, really amazing and humbling. But in that time, I met this really incredible guy by the name of Mike Mayer, who is the owner and CEO of Houwzer, which is a real estate brand that is doing its best to grow nationally, very similar in style, scope, values as Power Home Remodeling was. And in my initial conversations with Mike, I just felt like, wow, there's so many parallels between the work that you're doing and the work that Power has been able to do throughout my tenure, going from a $30 million brand when I got there officially to a $1 billion brand at the end of last year. And it was a pretty remarkable run in those 11 years. And while I'd love to take credit for that crazy growth trajectory, there's a lot of amazing people that work there and had worked there, still work there, that made that machine go. And I just had a small opportunity to be a part of that ride. But I wanted to recreate that somewhere else in a business that was also looking to grow exponentially. And that was Houwzer. But in that process, and speaking to Houwzer about possible marketing opportunities, we kind of landed on the opportunity to be a chief people officer. And I was just kind of initially taken back by the idea, like, could I do this? But I started thinking about my career trajectory. And while it was rooted in marketing and advertising and communications, we spend the most of our time, 70% of our time inside of Power and on my team, working on internal comms, working on the 4 pillars of employee happiness and joy. And that is talent acquisition and building a pipeline of great people, human resources and relations, but really creating relationships with our employees through the human resources umbrella, developing employee engagement and experience, as I articulated earlier, and development of learning and development opportunities, from onboarding to ongoing training to the development of Power University, where we're teaching all of our employees at different levels of their career soft skills that they can utilize both personally and professionally as they continue to grow in their own worlds. And as I thought about that, I was like, wow, there could be a real synergy here between what I love to do the most, based on, as you can probably tell from my own energy, to what I think the business needs the most, or what I think all businesses need the most, which is happy, committed, motivated employees. And one thing led to another. And through a relationship that I had at Power with Power's current chief people officer, Holly Delaney, who was the chief people officer for Zappos, for some time. And I kind of learned underneath her in many ways, and took a leap of faith and a bit of risk to change my course in life as it relates to my career. And I've been here now for 4 months, so not a lot of time, but in those 4 months, I've been as happy as I could ever be.
Oh,
Love
amazing.
and love the opportunities that the brand creates, including the risk and reward attached to small businesses.
And I can totally see the connection between your theater background and how you lead. Being a theater kid myself, there's so much creativity. There's so much fun in the aspect of pulling something together, whether you're acting it out, creating costumes, writing the script. And I see that creativity. You said, writing sketches, at work, and just tapping into like the fun side of creative arts and transferring it to the workplace. Would you say that's kind of an accurate assessment of how you're using?
Absolutely. I so many people have asked me over the course of my career, how could you be so comfortable on stage when you're presenting, large, complex presentations about different types of strategy, and how do you make people feel comfortable? And I think a lot of that comes from a background where you're on stage your whole life, whether it be in theater, in film, in print, etc. You're constantly being evaluated, and you're constantly thinking about the right thing to say at the right time in order to bring an audience in to your emotions. And that's how I feel about life and at work. I think they're kind of blended, and I've been beyond fortunate to feel comfortable on any stage that I've been on, and confident in what I'm talking about. And at the same time, going on being creative at work, I think it's the simple thing, right? I think at the end of the day, people spend, and we say this all the time, right? People spend way, way, way more time at work than they do at home. And I've never been understanding of the notion that work should just feel like work, and that you put in your 8 hours a day and you go home and you thank God that you're home and you don't have to deal with the people that were working side by side with you every day, virtual or otherwise. And I just don't get it. And I feel like you can actually have a lot of fun at work, and you can make work fun. It doesn't have to be, I don't care what product you're selling, what widget it is. And believe me, remodeling, window siding, doors, roofing is not that fun. Real estate's a lot more fun in some ways, but it's all about the people that work within. And I think if you give people the levers to be the best versions of themselves, you will find yourself in a situation where people truly find joy at the office and then bring that joy home.
Yeah, and how you mentioned earlier how you make sure that all employees are heard and that they are their authentic selves and not trying to put on a mask. Because I feel like in the office environment, there's pressure to be a certain way, to get rid of the unsavory things that may be part of your personality.
Exactly right. And I think that there is this preconception when you walk into an office, whether you're an entry level employee or you come in from the outside as a consultant or you're an executive that comes on in. And I think there's this certain stigma as to how you should act and who you should be and what a boss should say and do and what a leader should act like, as well as what an entry level employee should act like and how they should just say yes or no to their boss. And I hate all of that. And I think the biggest lesson I learned from Holly, from her time at Zappos before she came over to Power, was that the best HR people, the best at the time, these chief HR officers who become chief people officers, the best ones in the business threw away the traditional book when it came to this is how employees need to act. This is the rules of the business. And while those things are important and you want to have rules and regulations and you want to have career roadmaps and you want to have salary banding and all those types of things to ensure success of the business and commitment and comfort within your career path. So not throwing away any of those things, but throwing out the book to her meant we want to rediscover how businesses can have fun and be and individually how businesses can create a landscape for people that they just ultimately fall in love with, very similar to the loves and passions they have for other things. And also leaning into people's outside passions and bring those passions into the workplace. As we talked about, right? Like my passion is writing screenplays. My passion is still acting at times. And I can bring those elements of that type of passion into the workplace. If someone else loves to create art, Well, why not bring that passion, even if you're in people or legal or a sales team? Why not bring some of those hobbies in and be celebrated for the things that you're doing, and hopefully impact the company simultaneously? So there are a lot of opportunities, I think, for people to just lean into the fact that work doesn't have to be a long slog, that it could be fun, cool, interesting, and informative, and give you the tools that you ultimately need if you're doing it the right way to succeed no matter where you go. And the way I look at it always is that I'm not asking you for blood. I'm not asking you to give me a commitment for 5, 10, 15 years. I'm asking you to give me a commitment today. And if you can give me a commitment today, can you give me a commitment tomorrow? And if we continue to have that dialogue where you feel comfortable with me and trust in me and vice versa, and that we are holding each other accountable, where I will be your champion and I will be your accountability partner, and vice versa, then we will create a real relationship, a real dialogue that will allow you to extend your time at the office.
Yeah, I feel like the best leaders act like coaches, like what you kind of just described. Like, okay, let's get through today and then come back tomorrow and then we'll see and, recalibrate instead of just delegate and scold. And so I really appreciate, that outlook of, being a leader is, coaching, supporting, helping that person get to the next level.
Yeah, and it's also on the reverse, right? I had this conversation with one of my colleagues yesterday, and again, it's kind of an old adage, but I have found that the best leaders in the world are the ones ultimately who admit immediately, I don't have all the answers to everything, right? And it's like the leaders that get themselves in trouble and ultimately fail consistently are the ones that think they have to have all the answers based on the title that they have on their business card. And I don't subscribe to that whatsoever. I think the best leaders in the world are bringing their teams in to the problems that the business has. Here's the biggest challenges we have as a business. You have been hired to be a solutions provider, and I don't care what level of the business you're in or what experience you have. You're a human being with emotions and feelings and ideas. So let's celebrate all of those and help me solve these problems, because when these problems are solved at the business level, everyone wins, our customers and our employees, as well as the candidates who possibly want jobs here as well. So I feel empowered to empower my people to be those solutions providers for the business, which is exactly what they want when they leave college and think about their careers.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of humility to go to, an employee and say, "Hey, I'm having trouble with this. Can you help me?" Because I feel like our culture has made leadership such an authoritative figure.
Yeah, I mean, it feels in some ways like every corporation has to have some sort of dictatorship, that you want to create fear with your employee base in order for them to react accordingly, which is just the opposite of how people are. And it's funny. It's like, why does it have to be any different at a corporation than it is at home? If you were at home talking to your friends or your family and you were screaming at them all day long to get things done, I imagine you'd have somewhat of the opposite reaction of getting those things done. You might get those things done initially, but eventually they're going to dead ear all of those things and ignore you, or be so fearful of you that the only thing they're going to think about all day long is your demise or their own. And I don't want that to be a part of any business that I'm a part of. I want people to feel compelled, obligated to bring everything they can to work. Every idea is an important one, and some of these ideas will work, some of these ideas won't. Some of these ideas will have to be tabled for a while, or some of these ideas will be immediately executed, and people should be rewarded and compensated for their ideas. Oops, sorry, that's my dog.
I have to. I understand.
Give me 1 second. I'm going to come right back.
Okay.
So sorry about that.
Oh no, I deeply understand. Mine have interrupted more meetings than you could ever imagine, especially when they're hungry.
Always. It's like, by the way, and again, it's like this is one of the challenges, I think, of being in a virtual environment or a hybrid environment. So when everybody asks me, like, would you want people to be in the office 5 days a week, or do you like the hybrid model, or would you eventually want to go full remote? And I think there are pros and cons to all of those things. I am a firm believer in that culture is king. And I don't think that you could have a culture that is best in class when people never spend time with each other than through a lens on your computer. I think getting people together pushes for collaboration, commitment, community, creativity. I'm trying to think if there's any other C's I can come up with, but nonetheless, um, but I think it does all those things. And I think when you're doing that in a virtual environment, you lose sight of how important community is within an organization. At the same time, I think we're in a new world, and I think leaders have to adapt to that new world. And that new world being, I think, the best new world being a hybrid model. I think people want flexibility in their schedules. They want to be able to take their dogs out on walks at lunchtime, and they want to be able to, when the day ends, whatever time that may be, they want to be able to turn off their laptop and go into their living room, put up their feet, grab a drink, and relax. And so, and I appreciate that as well. I think commutes are very difficult on many people, and trying to balance life and work is really troubling as well at times when you're 5 days a week. So I do think there's a balance there ultimately, and that is coming in a couple days a week to do the things I just suggested, but giving yourself the flexibility to do the things that you need to do outside of that, as long as productivity is high.
Yeah, and to me, that's extremely fair because you still get that camaraderie, you get the culture. But then for individuals that may have a little difficulty in the office and prefer be solo, that also helps them as well.
Totally agree. And I think that, as a year ago, I would have said the exact opposite. And that I was staunch, even through the pandemic, I was a staunch supporter of 5 days a week. We got to go back to business like it was in 2018 and 19. But I have found that production is high, if not higher, when you're working at home often than it is when you're in the office due to the associated daily distractions of being in an office. But ultimately, I think that having that kind of model where you balance things out, I think is important. And balance in general, I think is really important. One of the things when I decided to leave my last organization, one of the things that I was so committed to was the simple concept that I want balance, more balance, better balance, not only in my life, but for the organization that I have the opportunity to lead. And I want people to be at 120% when they're in the office, so to speak, virtual or otherwise. And I want people to be at 120% at home. And I think the hybrid model offers you the ability to do both if you're doing it the right way.
Yeah. So let's talk about fun. One of my favorite topics. So how do you bring fun to the workplace? You mentioned a couple of examples already, but I'd like to hear more in depth.
Yeah. So, I'll go back to some of my, the opportunities that I had at Power that I'm trying to re-emulate here at Houwzer. And I think that it doesn't matter what industry you're in or what type of organization you have, as long as the leadership team is comfortable with leaning into the fun piece of work. I think it could happen anywhere. So, when I first got at Power, one of the things that the CEO had asked me was, well, I want to develop out a best-in-class employer brand. How do we do that? And at the time, frankly, I had no idea. I was a traditional agency guy, doing agency type things, trying to drive revenue and not worrying so much about the culture. And then when I flipped that script and figured out what that is and interviewed employees, which I strongly recommend people do, is interview employees and find out from them, like, what do you love to do and what makes you happy? And what I ended up finding out at Power, and I think the same thing of Houwzer, it was at the time, a young millennial audience. Now a young millennial Gen Z audience, similar to Houwzer, as far as most of the employees that work here. And what do millennials, Gen Zs want? They enjoy competition, and they want to work for a company that is more than just profit. That is people over profit and community over profit. And so I was like, okay, well, there's a competition feel here. Number one. And number two, there's a community need, a need to work for an organization that's doing more for the world than just reaping its benefits from a capitalism perspective. And so what is the purpose? What is our why? How do we develop that kind of golden circle? And fun being a big part of that. And so I was thinking, okay, well, first thing we're going to do is we're going to create like an ESPN style competition where we're Sports Center meets Saturday Night Live. And our sales team who is, looking to drive revenue into the business. And every week, individual salespeople have sales goals they want to hit to drive that revenue. And our customer development team at Power, they were looking to achieve the same types of things, like as many, if they can get X amount of appointments per week. That was part of the goals that were set for them attached to the business. So I'm like, oh, well, we can create competition here where the customer development reps in all over the country are competing against each other, and the same with the sales reps. We can create like this kind of going into now March Madness tournament, very similar to the NCAA, where we're stacking people up against each other, and the 64th currently most successful person in the business can play the number one seed potentially as it relates to the person that's driving in the most volume in the business at that time. And these would be weekly competitions that we would create over the course of a year. And every one of those weekly competitions would flow into this weekly video, Sports Center / Saturday Night video, where I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to host it. I would have analysts attached to it that were VPs of different business units that were breaking down the videotape as it relates to what people were doing. And the goal was simple. Let's make people famous, number one. If we can make people famous and we could put people in a position to be incredibly successful by pushing them harder to become famous, and also give them a spotlight where they could bring their inner personality out in the process. Let's do that. And that became incredibly successful. That led to the development of a magazine and a kind of a quarterly publication that I think looks more like GQ than it did like a traditional company newsletter, where we're highlighting stories of people. And again, pushing the envelope of bringing out stories from people, emotional stories, funny stories, compelling stories about them and what they're doing for the business, as well as what the business can do for them. And that was then shared with their family, their friends. Mom, look at me. I'm on the cover of this magazine. And look at me, I just won my competition in sales, and look at the funny video this team put together. And that would create candidate opportunity. Like, I want to work for a company like this. And then all of a sudden that moved into, well, why do we just have to stop with competition? There's a whole bunch of other departments within the organization that are not competitively based. So how do we make them famous? Well, let's start putting together like, quarterly parody films that are just parody that we're doing, or some of the the pop culture things that are going on around us, and bring those in, and that led to competitions for ideas. Like, what ideas do you have to bring more joy into the workplace? And that led to, instead of doing traditional socials with different departments, that we combine departments together so they get to know each other a little bit more. And we do different types of socials, better, more fun socials, from Top Golf to creating little tournaments around town to competitions again on the social side, which led to larger and cooler and different events, like going to Mexico at the end of every year, and celebrating our employees and bringing their families into it.
Wait, hold up. Paid? Everyone goes to Mexico?
The only thing you would be responsible for is your flight and your significant other's flights, but everything else is completely paid for 4 days. And it's not just going to a resort in Cancun, which is itself great, but we would pull out all the stops. We created a competition called Power Olympics. Again, people want to compete. So we would create literally the Olympic Games. We'd actually build a stadium on the sand, and different territories compete against one another, and we'd have jumbotrons, and I would be the MC with my colleagues, and it was pure craziness, from tug of war to climbing obstacle courses to swimming to everything you can imagine, and with big trophies and big rewards at the end of it. We also would bring in famous acts. From Snoop Dogg to Post Malone to The Killers to Weezer, to Macklemore, to everyone in between. Would come in for private concerts on the beach in this organization. And it was, obviously some people might be listening to this and saying, oh my God, that's a ton of money. But yeah, it is. But would you rather give, not using Chevy Chase and the Christmas Vacation as the example, would you rather give your employees $100 gift card or even $1,000 gift card at the end of the year, which may impact them in one way or another, but isn't going to resonate? Or would you rather take them on a once in a lifetime trip? And we decided to do that. And that led to development of human beings. Like, it's not just about having fun. It's about development of a personal life skills. And that was the creation of leadership events, where we bring in speakers from all walks of life, from former President George Bush to Colin Powell, to incredible authors, to sports figures, from Wayne Gretzky to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, to speak to these people and to help us understand what winning looks like. And when you develop a culture of commitment and fun and development personally as well as professionally, and creating a culture that it's winning at all costs, but winning with delight, then you can win as an organization and be successful. And I think that's a lot of what Power was able to create and ultimately what I'm trying to recreate here.
Mm-hmm. And you think about, I think about in my career, all the mandatory fun that, we had to do as employees. And, it definitely was not a trip to Mexico and a concert. So it's, that was so awesome to hear that you're thinking of thinking big, essentially. So how has the reception been, with these incentives and perks and, all this encouragement incorporated?
It's been great, and one of the reasons why I accepted the job at Houwzer and to do this particular role was to run the same plays. Obviously with modifications to improve, constantly improving, relentless dedication to improvement in that regard. But it's to do those things and to bring this type of joy and commitment and personal and professional development into this organization, and God willing, other organizations that can follow suit as well on these types of things. Because it's not, it does take ingenuity and creativity, and money, but
Yeah.
it doesn't take much more than that as long as you're committed to it. And I think that's really where I think companies ultimately win or lose. I think more often than not, companies choose profit over their people. And when you choose profit, you lose people. And I'm fortunate to work for an organization in Houwzer and a CEO in Mike that is all in on people. And when you have that commitment from the top, you can create anything you want. And I think the sky's the limit when it comes to imagination. And off of like someone like you, someone like me who grew up in theater, theater is imagination. So I feel like I lean into the concepts of imagination. That's how I grew up.
Yeah. So, and I see that theater background in our entire conversation too. Just, being silly, being goofy, being creative, coming up with, these things out of thin air. It's so awesome. So for HR managers who, may not have as intense of a creative background as you do, how can you encourage them to think out of the box and be a little bit more creative with, the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've often said this. I think great organizations are the sum of all their parts. And I think in every department, people become siloed. Well, I'm in human relations or human resources rather, and I'm not going to lean into marketing, or I'm not going to lean into this other group because, they do their thing, I do my thing. And that's where, again, I think people have to start thinking a bit more outside of the box. In fact, there should be no boxes in organizations. There should just be one flat, level playing field. And I think when you bring in simple idea to throw out to your organization, we want to create joy in the workplace. What makes you happy? When you think about the things that make you happiest in life, what are they? And some people are going to say, well, my dogs make me happy, or I love watching sports on television, or I love playing sports, or I love doing X, Y, and Z. Use that information. Most people look at that and say, well, how am I going to incorporate any of that? It doesn't make any sense when it comes to this type of a corporate environment. Why not? Until I knew that we had a whole bunch of athletes at Power who used to compete semi-professionally, professionally, or amateurly, I would never have considered developing a Power Olympics program. But knowing that allowed me and my creative, amazing team and teams outside of my team to develop that type of program. Same with, developing competitions that became parodies so all of these things happen by truly talking to your employee base and finding out from them, what is it that they want? And one idea leads to another idea, which leads to another idea, until you have so many ideas, you don't know what to do with what to do. It's a great problem to have.
Yeah, I love it. And I think that's a great note to end on. So Bennett, where can people find you? If they want to reach out, how can they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on LinkedIn like the rest of the world, right? So you can certainly find me on LinkedIn at Bennett Andelman. And I'm also available at Houwzer. If you go to houwzer.com, HOUWZER.com. I know it's a little complicated, but that URL, you can find me on that platform as well. And I am always available. I'm an open book and I'm an open door. And so if anyone out there wants to just chat it up via any of those platforms or call me, I am always going to return your phone call.
That's wonderful. Thank you for being so open, with the community. And again, okay, I am Lindsay Patton, host of the People Analytics podcast. You can reach me at lindsay@staffgeek.com. And Bennett, thank you so much for your time. I love talking about fun. This was a great conversation.
My pleasure. Makes me smile as well. So I'm really happy to be a part of it. Thanks again.
Thank you for listening to Staff Geek's People Analytics podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay Patton, and I'm always looking to interview leaders who put people first. If you or someone you know lead with a people-first mindset, please email me at lindsay@staffgeek.com. That's LINDSAY@staffgeek.com. If you want to take things a step deeper and understand your organization's true culture DNA, I encourage you to take Staff Geek's free culture assessment. Just head to staffgeek.com and click the button that says Free Culture Assessment. Thanks again for listening.